I'll go ahead and get started. As you guys obviously, I'm assuming most of you are here to watch the debate we had just this afternoon on our school funding package. Just to review what that does, it's a 2.25% increase. Keep in mind that we're also fully funding our teacher pay increase that we passed last year, following through with that commitment we made to increase beginning teacher salaries. We also have pieces in there dealing with transportation equity, per pupil equity funding, operational sharing, and then we also have an additional, what we would look at as kind of a inflation factor and a one-time, similar to some of the things we've done in the past in a one-time funding when it comes to education funding. The one thing that I want to keep in mind and that we heard in the debate that I think just needs some clarification, while that may be a one-time increase to try to address the Biden inflation, you have to look at it from the standpoint we'd be building that within the budget. As we were having this conversation on the floor and the Democrats proposing 5%, you heard using one-time funds out of the ending balances to fully fund a 5% proposal. As the majority party, when we're putting together these packages, we have to be able to make it fit within the general fund. When we start using one-time funds, we go back to the Culver era of budgeting under the Democrat trifecta, in which you're using ending fund balances of one time to fund general fund ongoing revenue. So that needs to be clarified from the debate, because what we're not talking about in our bill is one-time funding that wouldn't be in the general fund. This would just be in a one-time appropriation to deal with inflation. We built the bill in a way to try to address a lot of different concerns. As you heard on the floor, and even the Democrats would agree, I think, different school districts have different demands that are needed upon them. That's why we looked at things like operational sharing. What are some things that we hear back in our districts? Schools want to be able to have flexibility to share staff. That's why we put it in the bill. We didn't just focus on SSA. We looked at some inflationary costs, like I already said. We looked at sharing, transportation funding to make sure all schools are at the statewide average. We built a bill in a way that we tried to address the different concerns that address school districts differently. I think we'd all agree that not every school district's the same. That's why we built the proposal the way we did, so it would have different impacts to different needs within the state. And the last thing that I'll say on that topic, as we're having these conversations with the per pupil funding model that we have at the state level, one of the things, and you're going to see, I think, bills from the House Republicans to try to do this, is we have to have growth in rural Iowa. As you lose students and have declining enrollments, you're going to obviously be receiving less money regardless of what the legislature were to appropriate. And it ties back into seeing growth within the state of Iowa, all across Iowa. That's just kind of what I see as one of the topics we'll continue to talk about the rest of session, to make sure we're making investments all across the state to see growth, because that's also going to be part of this solution to make sure that we're having proper funding all across the state. So that's all I really have to say on the SSA, so I'll open it up to you guys for any other follow-ups to that or other topics.
Mr. Speaker, what's your response to the school districts that say they'll have to raise property taxes with the funding levels that are in the Republican proposal?
Yeah. And so we have a formula within the state. We have what we call a budget guarantee. Some of this stems back from the creation of our funding model that we use with the state with the per pupil equity and the formula as it was built. And so all of that impacts school districts differently. Again, it gets back to the conversation that I had earlier. Each school district is impacted by what we do here, whether it's declining enrollment or the things that we appropriate. So that's something that's been built into the funding, into the formula. It's something that we've talked about, how do you try to tackle the formula, but it's a very complicated topic on what that would look like. And what we've heard from some people who've had these conversations, it may bring so much instability into school funding that is the current system better than not knowing what that would result in. One last thing that I wanted to say, not to move on necessarily from that question, but keep in mind that School Board Association, Administrators of Iowa, and other groups did actually support the plan that we have here today, which we think is a strong sign of a group of organizations that are a part of schools all across the state. And we feel that's why we brought this bill forward, because it fits the needs of the schools all across the state, all across different school districts in Iowa.
This bill will obviously go back to the Senate, which passed a different plan with a 2% a few days ago. Are you confident this can get passed over there, or what kind of negotiations need to happen?
Well, I know that I've already had conversations with the Senate about the importance of these other pieces as well as just SSA. I think we were in a position where we wanted to take firm action so that we could show as a House we supported this plan. But they're aware that several of these pieces that we see in here we put in there for a reason, because we think they're important. I use operational sharing as an example, Stephen. It's something that we hear from a lot of our rural school districts. We wanted to see that expanded. So I'm hopeful as this bill now goes back to the Senate, they will take a look at what some of those other things are, as well as, or on top of the SSA.
Last year, your caucus was very insistent on the extra money for paraeducator salaries. Am I correct that there is no dedicated funding stream for that this year?
So the $14 million is continued to be funded within the state's budget. So we will have, the $14 million will be funded within the state's budget this year. It didn't occur within this bill, and if it did, it was built into the overall, back to the confusion of the school funding formula. But we have full expectation and confidence we will have the $14 million. So that wouldn't be a one-time level of funding that we'd be pulling back. So that will make its way through the process, yeah.
Earlier this week, you had committees in the Senate and the House both unanimously pass out the hands-free driving bill. What is its fate here in the House?
I may have given a similar answer. We have not yet caucused on it, but now that it's advanced through a committee, it's a conversation that I assume we're going to have as a full caucus. I don't have a read at this point in time, but now that it's through committee, it's probably more of an active discussion that we'll have amongst all Republicans. I think there will still be members that will have concerns with the policy, whether it's an overreach concern that they may have. Why are we not including other things within that conversation when it comes to distracted driving? But now that it's moving through the process, I think it makes it more of an active conversation.
So protest earlier this week over a posting bill to give pesticide companies protection from litigation without a proper warning language. That passed the Senate last year, but I don't believe you guys took it up. Is there appetite in your chamber here to pass that this year?
I don't think that we've reached any conclusions on what we would do with that at this point in time. Again, I think the Senate's a little further along in their conversations. It will be something that within our caucus that I don't think we're all in lockstep on that. I don't think we've even made a decision on what it will look like if it moves forward. As I've said when we talk about this topic, I know there's very strong feelings on all sides of it. As we're having this conversation, we just have to be mindful that the Roundup that's made in this country is made in Iowa. Our alternative choices for those of us in agriculture would be relying on products from China. And so I think it's just something that as we're having this debate, it's bigger than just the issue of Roundup itself. It's also security and making sure that we're having access to these products in our modern farming resumes that we have and we utilize.
What was a bill moving out of subcommittee in the House about banning trailers and things like that? Where is your caucus on that issue and why is it important?
Well, what's interesting actually about that was actually brought up to me at my forum. We talked about a lot of different issues, but that was brought up as well. I think what you'll see is we plan on having a discussion within our caucus, and that bill, having moved out of committee, I think something that as a House caucus we at least need to have further discussions about. So I don't see it being something that just passes out of committee and at least doesn't make it before the full caucus to see what the input would be.
What are some of the concerns surrounding this?
Well, I think a lot of the concerns, like what I heard in mine, is some would just say, well, it isn't happening. Others would say it is happening. I think it's something we need to have a discussion about as a legislature, and also, just the fact that we really can't get answers to whether it is actually happening, who may be doing it. Those are the kind of discussions we just need, I think, have to have as we're making those decisions.
We're more than a month into session now. Coming into it, property tax reform was, on the top of your agenda. Where is your caucus at on property tax reform right now? As some people today were talking about some legislation potentially causing property taxes to lose.
Yeah. So we've had some discussions with the Senate. We've had some activities. Representative Kaufman and myself have been having meetings with members of the Senate. I still think we're on a similar path to potentially release several bills, but I think we're getting closer to what those may actually be as we move forward. I also think that as we're doing that with the Senate, I think it'll be good for both the House and Senate to be having that conversation at the same time. So I'm hopeful that as we're having that property tax discussion, we can both be actively engaged in it. Even if we're not in complete agreement, that's a good sign that we're trying to work towards a solution.
There's a bill that was filed by a member of your caucus that would make it a felony to take a minor to a drag performance. Is that criminal penalty something you think is appropriate, and do you have any concerns that that type of legislation could face legal challenges over like First Amendment?
Yeah, I'm unaware of that at this time. Let me have some conversations with the members that filed it. I'm unaware of the bill at this point in time. Let me have some more conversations before I'd answer that, Stephen.
The Commerce Committee has unanimously advanced both a community solar bill and also a pharmacy benefit manager bill. Do you expect those to come to the floor, or what? Have you caucused on those?
Yeah, so the PBM, Pharmacy Benefit Manager, is something that in the House, maybe not this exact bill, but things that we've considered in the past. So I would expect for us to further that conversation now that it's made it out of committee. When it comes to community solar, I think that there is interest within the House to be part of it. There's still a lot of questions to be answered. I look at that as probably tying into more of the global conversation around energy policy. Maybe not necessarily tied to when I say included, but as part of the global conversation from the governor's bill, as well as things like community solar. I'll do one more. All right. Oh, all right. You
Sorry to get
yeah.
a third, but a bill that would extend Iowa's current law banning the instruction on gender identity and sexual orientation, K through 6. The bill would ban it 7 through 12. Where are you at on that? Do you think that's something that will gain traction this year?
So it was part of the discussion that we had the last time we debated it. We decided not to go any further with it, but we've had enough feedback from the caucus, and I think it is something to bring up, and will be a possibility to continue to advance that bill.
Concerns that it's still under litigation currently?
I think we'll have to weigh those as we make those decisions. But again, this was a part of the original conversation. We just didn't land there at this time. So I think we want to continue those.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it.